Look at you, pathetic." Those were the words my daughter hurled at me across a polished mahogany table in the heart of Chicago on Mother's Day. Her laugh, sharp and cutting, bounced off the crystal chandeliers above us. The restaurant, one of the finest in the city, had gone quiet in that instant. The clinking of forks against porcelain stopped. Waiters froze mid-step, and I felt the heavy weight of every eye in that room turning toward me. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, swirling the wine in her glass, her smile dripping with contempt, as if humiliating me was part of the entertainment she had promised her friends. On either side of her sat her husband Miles, smug and self-satisfied, and his parents Richard and Helen, who clutched their glasses with tight fingers while pretending to look concerned. Behind them were Vanessa's friends, Samantha and Chloe, both leaning in eagerly, their eyes dancing with cruel amusement. I had been the subject of their mockery many times, but this day was different. I let her laugh echo, let it settle into the silence, and then I reached slowly into my handbag. What I pulled out was small enough to seem harmless, yet heavy enough to change every life at that table. I placed a lacquered red folder squarely in front of me. Its glossy surface reflected the light above, like blood freshly spilled. I pushed it forward just an inch, enough for everyone to see, but not yet enough to reveal its contents. My fingers lingered on the folder as I lifted my chin and looked directly into my daughter's eyes. For the first time in years, it was her smile that trembled, not mine. "Tell your husband," I said, my voice calm but cutting through the silence like a knife, "why the allowance ends tonight. Tell his parents why the Lakeview estate they've enjoyed will no longer be theirs to call home. And tell yourself why the company you flaunt as your own is already slipping from your grasp." Miles's fork fell against the plate with a sharp clatter. Richard stopped breathing mid-sip, the wineglass quivering in his hand. Helen's painted face drained of color until her rouge sat on her cheeks like grotesque patches. Samantha blinked, unsure whether to laugh again, and Chloe's mouth hung open as though she had forgotten how to close it. But it was Vanessa's reaction I savored. Her smirk faltered, her eyes darted toward the folder, and for the first time, she understood she had underestimated me. Around us, the restaurant had dimmed into silence, as though strangers could sense the ground shifting beneath our family. I could feel the tension humming in the air, pressing against my ribs. For 65 years, I had endured silence, dismissal, and laughter at my expense, but not tonight. Tonight, I would take back the power they never believed I held. To understand how I became the woman who could silence an entire table with a single folder, you must know who I am. My name is Iris. I am 65 years old, a widow, a mother, and for far too long, I allowed myself to be the shadow behind my daughter's glittering stage. I was the woman mocked as weak, poor, and burdensome, the woman they pushed aside at parties, the one who brought homemade bread that ended up in the trash. I lived quietly, in a small home in Milwaukee, driving an old Buick that groaned at every stoplight, with peeling paint on the walls and secondhand furniture that told stories of other people's lives before mine. They thought that was all I was, but that life, the life they sneered at, was only a mask I chose to wear. Behind the peeling walls and rusting car keys was another truth entirely, a truth I had hidden so carefully that even my own daughter never suspected. They believed they had built their empire with their own hands, that their cars, their houses, their status had sprung from their ambition. But the truth was all of it. Every shiny stone of their empire had been funded, protected, and quietly managed by me. What sat inside that red folder was proof that the foundation they stood on was mine, and that I had the power to shake it until they crumbled. Remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below if you want to hear more grandma life stories filled with emotion, betrayal, and unexpected strength. That night in Chicago was not the beginning. It was the ending act of a story that had started half a year earlier. To truly understand how that folder came to rest on the table, how I came to sit across from my daughter with calm instead of fear, you need to step back with me. 6 months earlier, I was living alone in Milwaukee, surrounded by the smell of old wood and fading wallpaper, where the sound of my Buick struggling to start each morning was the rhythm of my days. It was there that the seeds of betrayal were sown, where humiliation grew roots, and where I began the journey that would end with a lacquered red folder and a room full of shocked faces. To understand how I reached that Mother's Day table in Chicago, I must take you back 6 months earlier, to a winter morning in Milwaukee. The sky was pale gray, and snow clung stubbornly to the edges of the sidewalks. I lived in a modest little house on the outskirts of the city, a place that looked humble enough for neighbors to pity me, but safe enough to keep them from asking too many questions. My Buick, an old sedan that groaned like an arthritic knee, sat in the driveway, its paint dulled by years of winters. To outsiders, I was just another old woman living quietly, stretching out her pension check, clutching grocery coupons at the market, and wearing the same wool coat year after year. That was the picture I had painted for the world, and it worked. Even my daughter Vanessa believed it. She paraded around as if she had climbed to the top of the world all by herself, mocking my faded dresses and chipped mugs as though they were symbols of her superiority. The truth, of course, was much different. Inside my desk drawer, hidden beneath old photo albums and recipes scribbled in fading ink, sat documents no one had ever seen. They showed I was the majority shareholder of Sterling Development, a company worth tens of millions. I had inherited part of it from my late husband, but I had grown the rest through shrewd investments, patient planning, and a refusal to waste money on appearances. I lived modestly, not because I had to, but because it gave me the freedom to watch how others behaved when they believed I had nothing. 6 months before that dinner, I watched from the window as my daughter and her husband pulled up in their gleaming black SUV. The car shone like a jewel against the snow, a clear signal to the neighbors that important people had arrived. Vanessa stepped out in high heels, her fur coat brushing the snow, her lips painted crimson. Miles followed, adjusting the cuff of his designer jacket as if even the cold should respect his wardrobe. They looked like success incarnate, a golden couple with money, style, and charm. But I knew better. I had been the one keeping them afloat for years, quietly funneling support through channels they never bothered to trace. "Mother," Vanessa said as she walked into my kitchen, glancing at the peeling wallpaper as though it might stain her coat. "You really should consider selling this place. It's depressing." She set her designer handbag on my worn counter, the leather gleaming against scratched laminate. Miles chimed in as he removed his gloves. "She's right, Iris. You shouldn't be living like this. You deserve better. Maybe somewhere safer, like one of those senior residences. It would give us peace of mind." His words dripped with concern, but his eyes lingered on the envelope of bills I had set aside to pay utilities. I smiled faintly, stirring sugar into my coffee. "I like my house," I answered. "It keeps me warm. That's all I need." They exchanged a glance, one of those silent conversations couples master after years together. To them, my words confirmed what they believed, that I was a fragile, poor widow clinging to scraps. What they didn't know was that I was studying them, memorizing the way Miles's fingers twitched when he spoke about money, the way Vanessa's gaze darted around the room as if searching for valuables that might still be hidden. Later that week, Vanessa called me again. Her voice was warm on the phone, too warm. "Mom, we're thinking of making some changes in the family. Miles has been talking to some friends about expanding the business. You know how much potential Sterling Development has. If only we had a little more control, we could take it to the next level." I let her speak, her voice rising with ambition. She talked about new projects, about properties near Lakeview, about luxury condos that would put her name on the city skyline. Then she dropped the line that told me everything I needed to know. "Of course, for that to happen, we'll need you to sign a few documents. Nothing serious, just standard things, to make it easier for us to manage on your behalf." I held the receiver close, my heart steady. "I'll think about it," I told her. That was always my answer when I wanted someone to reveal more. And she did. She began visiting more often, sometimes with Miles, sometimes alone, always with a smile that never reached her eyes. The neighbors noticed the expensive cars pulling up in front of my old house. "Your daughter must be very successful," one woman commented as we both shoveled our sidewalks. I smiled politely, letting her believe that Vanessa's glittering world was her own creation. At night, I sat at my desk, pulling out the documents that proved otherwise. Titles to properties, stock certificates, trust agreements. These were the bones of her so-called empire. She was nothing without me. And yet, every day she looked at me with disdain, convinced I was the failure who lived on her scraps. I remember one Saturday when Vanessa and Miles invited me to their Lakeview estate for brunch. The house was sprawling with wide glass windows overlooking the water. They greeted me at the door, their smiles stiff. "Come in, Mom," Vanessa said, as if she were welcoming a beggar into a palace. Inside, the table was set with crystal and silver, pastries arranged like artwork. I had brought a loaf of bread I baked myself, the crust golden, the scent warm. Vanessa took it with a laugh, then walked straight to the trash bin and dropped it in. "We don't eat things like this anymore," she said, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. Richard and Helen, Miles's parents, sipped their champagne and exchanged sympathetic looks with each other, the kind that weren't sympathy at all, but smug pity. Miles leaned back in his chair and said, "Mom, you know we give you $600 a month. That should be more than enough. Try to be grateful." He tapped the table with his manicured nails, adding, "Do you know the property taxes here are $10,000 a year? That's the kind of burden we carry. You should thank us for helping you." I nodded, silent, hiding my clenched fists beneath the table. They saw an old woman swallowing her pride, but what they didn't see was the spark catching fire in my chest. As I walked out of their mansion that day, the winter wind biting at my face, I realized the humiliation had become routine. They believed I would keep absorbing it, that my silence meant surrender, but inside, I was already planning. I knew the day would come when their laughter would die in their throats, when they would realize that the foundation of their luxury was never theirs to begin with. It was late February when I found myself once again at my daughter's estate on the shore of Lakeview, just outside Chicago. The house loomed against the gray sky like a monument to everything they thought they had built themselves. Its tall windows reflected the frozen water, its stone driveway was lined with luxury cars that gleamed even under a thin veil of snow. I clutched the handles of the small basket I had carried in, filled with something simple and homemade, as if bringing a piece of warmth could bridge the distance between us. Inside, the air was scented with expensive candles and fresh flowers arranged by a florist. Voices drifted from the dining room, cheerful and sharp with champagne. Vanessa was in her element, dressed in silk, her hair perfectly styled. She had invited guests again, neighbors, friends from her so-called ladies' club, and of course Richard and Helen, her in-laws. I stepped into the room and felt their gazes sweep over me like a cold draft. "Mother," Vanessa said with a smile that didn't touch her eyes, "you actually came." She walked toward me, her heels clicking on the polished floor, and took the basket from my hands. "What is this?" "Bread," I answered quietly, "fresh out of the oven." She lifted the cloth covering, looked at the golden loaf, then turned toward the room with a laugh. "Homemade bread," she announced as if she were presenting a joke. She carried it to the trash bin and dropped it in without hesitation. "We don't need this. We already have croissants from Paris, eclair flown in from New York. But thank you, Mother. Very quaint." The room erupted in polite chuckles. Samantha, seated near the head of the table, whispered something to Chloe, who covered her mouth to hide her grin. Richard offered a pitying shake of his head, while Helen sighed as though my existence itself was exhausting. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks, but I kept my eyes steady. I had learned to survive these humiliations by keeping still, by letting their words and laughter bounce against the walls of my silence. But that silence was no longer emptiness. It was a container filling up, drop by drop. Vanessa turned back to me, her smile gleaming with cruelty. "Sit down, Mother. I hope you don't mind if we already started without you." The table was lavish: roast beef, delicate pastries, towers of fruit glistening like jewels. My plate was empty, but Miles leaned over and placed a roll in front of me as though he were feeding a child. "There you go, Mom. We give you $600 every month, you know. That should keep you comfortable. Be grateful. Do you realize property taxes for this house alone are $10,000 a year? That's what we deal with. It's a different world, Mother." His words were delivered with the same tone one might use for a lecture, a subtle performance for the guests. Vanessa nodded approvingly, sipping her wine. I forced myself to smile faintly, though inside my chest a storm was building. I let my gaze wander around the room, memorizing each detail. The cutlery shone under the chandelier. The wine in their glasses glowed like rubies. The bread I had brought was buried under garbage, already forgotten. "Do you like the view?" Helen asked, her voice syrupy sweet. "Lakeview is such a blessing. Not everyone can live here, of course, but it's wonderful to know Vanessa and Miles are carrying on such a legacy." She paused, her eyes settling on me. "And of course, they take such good care of you." The words landed like a knife disguised as kindness. I simply nodded, folding my hands in my lap, pretending not to notice the silent exchange of smirks around the table. After brunch, I wandered into the living room while the others chatted over dessert. The walls were covered in framed photos of Vanessa at business galas, cutting ribbons, giving speeches, her hand always resting on Miles's arm. Not a single photo of me, not one memory of the years I had raised her alone after her father passed. I studied the smiling faces and wondered how long it would take for them to realize that all of it, the house, the cars, the business, wasn't theirs. Vanessa joined me, her heels clicking softly against the floor. "Mother," she said, her tone lowering so only I could hear, "you really shouldn't embarrass me in front of my friends. Bringing that bread, it makes you look poor, and it makes me look worse." She leaned closer, her perfume sharp. "You've done your part. Enjoy your little pension. Let us handle the real world." I looked at her, my own daughter, standing in her silk dress, speaking as if I were a burden she had to manage. For a moment, I felt the familiar ache of disappointment. But then I saw something else in her eyes, a hunger. She wanted more, always more, and she was willing to use me as the stepping stone. I said nothing, only nodded and walked away. My silence, as always, was mistaken for weakness. She didn't see that behind my quiet eyes, calculations had begun. Later that evening, as I drove my old Buick back to Milwaukee, the sound of the engine rattling beneath me, I replayed every word, every sneer, every laugh. They thought they had humiliated me again. But what they couldn't see was that each act of cruelty was fueling a fire. They believed I was fragile. They believed I was dependent. They believed wrong. That day in Lakeview, watching my bread disappear into the trash and listening to my daughter parade her superiority, I understood something important. Their cruelty was not just arrogance. It was desperation. And desperation leaves a trail. All I needed was patience to follow it. The house shrank behind me in the rearview mirror, its glowing windows like watchful eyes. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and whispered to myself, "One day this will end." And in that moment, I knew I would no longer be their victim. I would be their reckoning. The following month, Vanessa invited me back to the Lakeview estate. By then, the snow had melted into gray slush, and the air carried the damp scent of spring. I hesitated at first, but her voice over the phone was insistent. "Mother, come over this Saturday. I'm hosting the ladies' club, and it would be nice for you to be here." Her words sounded sweet, but I knew better. She didn't want me there out of affection. I was invited to play a role, one she had written for me long ago. The poor mother, the pitiful example, the reminder to her friends of how far she had climbed. I arrived wearing my plain coat and carrying a small jar of preserves I had made myself. The estate buzzed with activity. Cars crowded the driveway, sleek sedans and luxury SUVs gleaming under the early afternoon sun. Through the tall windows, I saw women in jewel-colored dresses, laughing, glasses of champagne in their hands. When I stepped inside, the warmth of expensive perfume and polished wood washed over me. Vanessa greeted me with a kiss on the cheek, her lipstick brushing my skin like a mark. "Everyone," she announced as she led me into the living room. "This is my mother." She paused just long enough to let the silence stretch before adding, "She lives out in Milwaukee, in the same little house since forever. Isn't that sweet?" The women laughed softly, their eyes glancing over me like I was an antique vase too cracked to be valuable. Samantha, always quick with her sharp tongue, tilted her head. "It must be hard, Iris, keeping up with everything on just a pension. But at least you don't have to worry, with Vanessa and Miles here to take care of you." Chloe chimed in, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Yes, darling, you're so lucky. My mother relies on us too. We all know how exhausting it can be." Her eyes flicked toward Vanessa, and they shared a knowing smile. I felt the familiar sting, but I kept my face calm. I handed Vanessa the jar of preserves. "I thought you might like this," I said softly. She took it, glanced at the label, and set it on a side table as if it were clutter. "Maybe the staff can use it," she said, turning back to her friends. "Anyway, ladies, let's go see the terrace. The view is simply stunning this time of year." They swept past me in a wave of perfume and silk, their heels clicking against the marble floor. I followed quietly, staying at the edge of their circle. Outside, the terrace overlooked the lake, sunlight glinting off the rippling water. Vanessa gestured grandly toward the horizon. "This is what we've worked for," she said, her voice full of pride. "Miles and I built this life from nothing." I bit back a bitter smile. They believed that lie because it made them feel powerful. None of them knew the truth, that the terrace beneath their feet, the mortgage hanging over their heads, the cars in the driveway were all propped up by me. As we returned inside, Vanessa stopped me in the hallway. "Mother, could you help the staff?" she asked sweetly, her eyes gleaming with something sharper. "We're short-handed today. Just wipe down the windows in the sitting room before guests move in there. It would make you feel useful." I froze for a moment, the jar of preserves still in my hand. Her words pierced me more deeply than she realized. Useful, as though I were nothing but a tool, a servant in her grand house. I nodded and made my way to the sitting room. There, with a rag and spray bottle handed to me by the maid, I wiped fingerprints from the tall windows while laughter rang out in the distance. Each stroke of the cloth was another mark of their contempt, another bruise to my pride. When I finished, I returned to the dining area where the women had gathered again. They were sipping cocktails, their bracelets jingling as they gestured dramatically. Vanessa caught sight of me and smiled as though she were about to deliver a punchline. "Oh, there she is," she said brightly. "Mother, why don't you bring out the dessert plates? They're in the cabinet, lower shelf." The lower shelf. Everyone knew what that meant. I bent down, feeling their eyes on me as I pulled out the plates one by one. My back ached, but I kept my movements slow, deliberate, refusing to let them see me falter. Behind me, I heard Samantha whisper, "She's like a maid." Laughter followed, soft but sharp enough to cut. I set the plates on the table, my hands steady, though inside I trembled with anger. Vanessa reached over, patted my arm, and said sweetly, "Thank you, Mother. Maybe now you'll feel useful." The room erupted in laughter again, the kind of laughter that feeds on cruelty. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding, then forced myself to smile faintly. I turned away and walked toward the window, looking out at the shimmering lake. They thought they had won. They thought I was nothing but the old woman they could use as a prop in their play of wealth. But what they didn't realize was that every insult, every laugh, every command was being stored inside me like stones in a wall. That afternoon, I drove back to Milwaukee in silence. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and my Buick rattled with every bump on the road. I could still hear Vanessa's words echoing in my ears. "Maybe now you'll feel useful." The phrase burned into me, searing deeper than I wanted to admit, but it also hardened me. I parked in front of my modest home, the paint peeling on the door, the mailbox leaning slightly to one side. Inside, I set down my purse and walked straight to my desk. I opened the drawer and pulled out the folder that held the documents no one knew about. Titles, trusts, certificates, proof of ownership. I spread them across the table, the papers whispering secrets of the power I truly held. I looked at them and whispered to myself, one day they will understand who really owns all of this. The laughter from the ladies' club still rang in my ears, but now it sounded different. It no longer wounded me, it fueled me. By early spring, the humiliations had become so frequent that they no longer surprised me. What surprised me was how quickly Vanessa and Miles began to escalate their plans, as though they had grown impatient waiting for me to crumble. One Saturday morning, I received a call from Vanessa. Her voice was cheerful, almost too cheerful. "Mother, we'd like to have you over for lunch. There are some things we need to discuss, important things about your future." The phrase, "your future," lingered in my ear long after the call ended. I knew what she meant. Still, I agreed to come. That afternoon, I drove my weary Buick back to Lakeview, the engine groaning on every incline. The estate stood tall against the glittering lake, a reminder of the empire my money had built, yet my name never adorned. Inside, the house was buzzing with energy. Miles greeted me with a practiced smile, his hand firm on my shoulder, guiding me toward the living room as if I were a guest of little importance. Vanessa stood near the fireplace, her silk blouse gleaming in the light, a glass of sparkling water in her hand. "Mother," she began, her tone dripping with rehearsed compassion, "we've been thinking a lot about you lately, about your safety, your comfort." Miles nodded eagerly. "This neighborhood you live in, Iris, Milwaukee has changed. It's not safe anymore. Too many break-ins, too much crime. You shouldn't be living alone at your age." I raised an eyebrow, my lips pressing into a thin line. "I've managed just fine," I replied. Vanessa walked closer, her heels tapping against the hardwood floor. "We've been researching some wonderful places, senior residences, where people your age thrive. They're safe, comfortable, and you'd be surrounded by others your age. You wouldn't have to worry about groceries or repairs or any of those burdens." Her smile widened as she placed a glossy brochure into my lap. Across the front was a photo of a sprawling, resort-style building with manicured gardens and a sparkling pool. The words Silver Horizon Residences were printed in gold. I flipped through the pages slowly. The photos showed happy couples holding hands, elderly women sipping tea on sunlit patios, staff in crisp uniforms assisting with smiles. On the surface, it looked like paradise. But my eyes caught the fine print. Private rooms starting at $3,000 per month, medical monitoring included, guardianship rights available upon evaluation. Miles sat beside me, lowering his voice as though confiding in me. "It's all taken care of, Iris. We'll pay for everything. $3,000 a month is nothing compared to what we already do for you. You deserve this. You've done enough. Let us take care of you." The way he said, "let us take care of you," made my skin prickle. His hand rested on my arm just a moment too long, a gesture meant to reassure but heavy with calculation. Vanessa knelt in front of me, her eyes locking on mine. "Mother, you'd love it there. Imagine never having to cook or clean again. Imagine feeling safe every night, not worrying about your old car breaking down. This is the best thing for you." I closed the brochure carefully, setting it on the coffee table. "And what about my house?" I asked, my voice calm. Miles glanced at Vanessa before answering. "Well, it would make sense to sell it. That way the money could be used for your care. You shouldn't be tied down with property taxes and repairs at your age. It's only logical." Vanessa reached for my hands, squeezing them gently. "We've already spoken to a realtor. Houses in your area are in demand. You'd get a good price, and with that, we could guarantee your spot at Silver Horizon. You'd be comfortable, cared for, and we'd have peace of mind knowing you're safe." Their words were wrapped in silk, but underneath, I heard the truth. They wanted my house. They wanted control. Silver Horizon wasn't a gift. It was a cage dressed up as a palace, a golden prison where they could tuck me away while they stripped me of everything I owned. I leaned back in the chair, studying their eager faces. Miles's eyes gleamed with a kind of hunger I had seen before in gamblers who smelled fresh winnings. Vanessa's smile was fixed, but behind it flickered impatience, as though she couldn't wait for me to agree and sign away my life. "I'll think about it," I said finally, my tone steady. Relief washed over their faces, though they tried to mask it. Vanessa clasped her hands together. "That's all we ask. Just think about it. We only want what's best for you." I rose slowly, smoothing the wrinkles in my coat. My gaze wandered around the room at the expensive paintings, the polished silver frames, the plush carpets underfoot. All of it was built on the foundation I had laid, the silent support I had given. They believed they were strong enough to discard me. They believed they could lock me away and take what remained. As I walked toward the door, Richard and Helen appeared from the dining room. Richard's voice was syrupy as he said, "Iris, they're right, you know. A place like Silver Horizon would be perfect for you. And it would free up this house, give Vanessa and Miles more space to build their family legacy." His words slipped out too easily, and I realized he had already envisioned himself enjoying the garage, the garden, maybe even the master suite. Helen touched my arm gently. "Think of it as a gift, dear. You've worked hard enough. Let them take care of the rest." I smiled faintly, though my stomach churned. I left their estate that day, with a brochure tucked into my bag, its glossy pages burning against my side like an accusation. They thought they had me cornered. They thought I would bend to their plan out of gratitude and fear. But as I drove back to Milwaukee, the rattling of my Buick loud in the silence, I whispered to myself, they have no idea who they're dealing with. Back home, I sat at my kitchen table, the brochure spread out under the yellow light. I studied the smiling faces, the manicured lawns, the promises of comfort and care. And then I saw it clearly. It wasn't a place for me to live. It was a place for them to bury me alive, legally and financially. The air was still sharp with the chill of early spring when everything changed. It wasn't in a courtroom or at a dinner table that I discovered the truth. It happened quietly, in the heart of Vanessa's grand kitchen, while she and her friends were too busy laughing in another room to notice me standing by the counter. I had been asked to fetch a tray of glasses, as though I were a servant instead of a guest. My daughter's iPad was lying on the marble countertop, screen lit, forgotten in the rush to refill champagne. At first, I didn't intend to look, but then the sound of a notification pinged, and my eyes fell on the words glowing against the glass. It was a message from Julia, my younger daughter. The daughter who rarely called, who kept her distance from family events, who I thought had chosen to stay out of Vanessa's games. My hands trembled as I read the preview. Then I opened the thread. The words cut deeper than any insult Vanessa had ever thrown at me. "Once she's in, Dad can use the garage. Lawyer says after 6 months you can claim guardianship over her savings. Make sure she signs everything. She's so desperate to feel loved, she'll do it." I read it twice, the meaning sinking in like ice water. It wasn't just Vanessa and Miles. Julia was involved too. My younger daughter, the one I thought might still hold some piece of compassion for me, was part of the plan. They wanted to move me into Silver Horizon, strip away my rights, and drain everything I had. Another message came through while I stood frozen, the sound sharp in the silence. "Once she's medicated, it will be easier. Don't worry, this is the only way we can get what we deserve." My stomach turned. The walls around me seemed to close in. They had already spoken to lawyers. They had already considered guardianship. And worst of all, they had already discussed medication, as though drugging me into silence was just another step in their checklist. I fumbled for my phone, my breath shallow. With quick fingers, I snapped photos of the messages, one after another, making sure every word was captured. I saved them all, my pulse racing with every click. Then I turned off the screen and set the iPad back exactly as I had found it, careful not to leave a trace. In the other room, laughter rang out. Vanessa's sharp and triumphant, Chloe's airy, Samantha's mocking. They were probably toasting to their plans, their glasses clinking together in celebration of a future where I was tucked away, silenced, erased. I carried the tray of glasses to the dining room as though nothing had happened. My face was calm, my steps steady. If Vanessa noticed the change in my eyes, she didn't say a word. She went on bragging to her friends about a new project, a supposed expansion that would make her the talk of Chicago. Miles nodded dutifully beside her, though I saw the flicker of worry in his eyes when talk of money came up. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I drove home under the glow of streetlights, the photos heavy in my phone like a hidden weapon. My Buick rattled louder than usual, every bump echoing the storm inside me. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I knew the truth. I was not simply a victim of cruel words or careless laughter. I was the target of a calculated scheme designed to strip me of my dignity, my freedom, and everything I had built. Inside my house, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the glowing screen of my phone. The photos stared back at me, undeniable proof. My daughters, both of them, saw me not as a mother, but as an obstacle to their greed. I pressed the phone to my chest and closed my eyes, the weight of betrayal settling heavy in my bones. But along with the pain came something else: clarity. For months I had endured humiliation in silence, convincing myself that patience was strength. But now patience would no longer protect me, action would. Action. I opened the drawers of my desk and pulled out the folder of documents I had hidden for years: property titles, trust agreements, shares in Sterling Development, proof that everything they claimed as their triumphs had been funded by me. I spread the papers across the table, arranging them neatly like a general laying out a battle plan. The red folder I would one day place on that Mother's Day table was born that night, in the dim light of my modest kitchen. It was no longer enough to survive their cruelty. I would fight back, not with screaming, not with violence, but with truth and evidence so sharp it would cut them where it hurt most: their pride, their wealth, their carefully curated image. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to smile. Not a smile of joy, but of resolve. They thought I was desperate for love. They thought I would sign anything. They thought I was weak enough to be silenced with pills and pity. They were wrong. The next morning, as the sun rose over Milwaukee, I called a number I hadn't dialed in years. The morning after I discovered the messages, I woke earlier than usual. The house was quiet, filled with the faint hum of the old refrigerator and the tick of the wall clock. I brewed coffee and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the stack of documents I had spread out the night before. Property deeds, stock certificates, contracts bearing my signature, all reminders of the life I had carefully built and concealed. For years, I had played the part of the frail widow, clinging to scraps. Now it was time to step back into the role I had hidden: the woman in control. I called Martin Hale. His voice on the other end was steady, calm, the same voice that had guided my husband and me through business deals decades ago. "Iris," he said after I told him who I was, "it's been too long." "I need your help," I told him, "and I need you to treat this with the utmost discretion." When we met later that day, I felt the years fall away. Martin looked older, his hair silver now, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. We sat in his office, a room lined with law books and framed degrees, the smell of polished wood and leather filling the air. I laid the photos of Vanessa's iPad on his desk. His jaw tightened as he read them. "They're planning guardianship," he said, his voice low. "And once that happens, you'll lose control of everything. They'll sign documents in your name, drain your accounts, maybe even sell assets you never agreed to." "I know," I answered. "That's why I'm here. I want to make sure they can't touch a cent that doesn't belong to them, and I want protection in writing." Martin leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "You've kept a lot hidden, Iris, more than most people realize. That might be the very thing that saves you. But we need to make sure every piece of property, every share, every asset is documented clearly in your name. And we'll need medical proof of your sound mind. If they're hinting at medication or mental instability, they'll try to argue you're unfit to manage your estate." The words hit me like a blow. My own children plotting to label me incompetent, but the fire inside me burned hotter. "Then we'll get proof," I said. Martin smiled faintly, nodding. "I'll arrange evaluations with doctors we trust. You'll have letters on file certifying you're fully capable, and I'll update your will and trust to close any loopholes they might exploit. From now on, nothing gets signed, nothing gets moved, unless I know about it first." I exhaled slowly, relief mingling with resolve. "Thank you, Martin. I don't want revenge in blood. I want justice in ink." We spent hours going through my assets. I pulled out titles to the Lakeview estate, though Vanessa paraded it as hers. I showed him the contracts for the luxury cars, Tesla, Porsche, Lexus, all of them purchased under my trusts and lent to her family as if they were gifts. I revealed the stock certificates that proved my majority ownership of Sterling Development, 75% quietly held through layers of trusts like Ravenhill. Martin examined each document carefully. "This is more than enough," he said, "but we'll need to prepare for their next move. If they sense you're resisting, they may accelerate their plans." I thought of Vanessa's eyes, the impatience simmering beneath her polished smile. They already have. That night, I returned home with a binder Martin had prepared. Inside were copies of everything, organized and notarized, each page stamped with the kind of authority Vanessa couldn't argue against. As I flipped through it, I imagined her face when she realized that the woman she called pathetic had built walls higher than her ambition could climb. But Martin was right. I needed more than documents. I needed evidence, proof of their intentions beyond cruel words and hidden messages. Proof that would strip away the masks they wore in public. And so I began to think about the people who could help me gather it. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror, studying my reflection. My face carried the lines of 65 years, but my eyes had sharpened. For too long, I had lowered them in shame. Now they were steady, clear, focused. I pulled on a navy coat, tied my scarf, and whispered to myself, "You're not the victim anymore." Over the following week, I followed Martin's instructions. I met with a doctor he trusted, undergoing tests and evaluations. The doctor asked questions, simple and complex, and I answered them with precision. When he handed me the letter certifying my full mental fitness, I held it like a shield. I also visited a notary to sign documents updating my will. In the event of my death, the bulk of my estate would bypass Vanessa and Julia entirely, instead directed toward charitable trusts and the Aurora Foundation, an idea I had nurtured quietly for years. The thought of my legacy funding shelters for women exploited by their families brought me more comfort than any luxury car or mansion ever could. But the most important step came when Martin leaned across his desk one afternoon and said, "You'll need eyes and ears inside their world, Iris. Someone to collect what they'll never show you." That was when Ethan Cole's name surfaced, a former police detective turned private investigator. Discreet, relentless, and loyal to the truth. Martin promised to make the introduction. As I left his office that day, the city wind whipping at my coat, I felt lighter than I had in months. For the first time, I was no longer reacting to humiliation. I was preparing. Every cruel laugh, every insult, every scheme had led me to this moment. And soon, I would turn the silence they mocked into the weapon they feared. I returned home, placed the binder beside the red folder that now lived on my desk, and touched its smooth surface. It was waiting, just as I was waiting. The day would come when it would sit not in the shadows of my kitchen, but in the center of a crowded room under the harsh light of truth. Martin kept his word. 2 days after our last meeting, he called and said he had arranged for me to meet someone who could help with the next step. That afternoon, I drove across town to a small office tucked above a row of shops. A modest sign on the door read, "Cole Investigations." The stairs creaked beneath my shoes as I climbed, but the moment I stepped inside, I felt the shift. The office was simple but orderly. Filing cabinets lined the walls, blinds half drawn against the sunlight, and a faint smell of coffee and old paper hung in the air. Behind a wooden desk sat Ethan Cole. He was in his early 50s, broad-shouldered, with lines etched deep around his eyes. There was something about him, solid, grounded, that reminded me of men who had seen too much but refused to be broken by it. "Iris," he said, standing to shake my hand. His grip was firm, not too strong, respectful. "Martin filled me in on a little, but I'd like to hear from you directly." So I told him. I spoke of the humiliations, of Vanessa's laughter, of the bread thrown in the trash, of Miles's lectures about allowance, of Richard and Helen's smug pity. I told him about Silver Horizon and how they tried to sell it as a gift when it was really a cage. And finally, I told him about the messages I found on Vanessa's iPad, the words from Julia that confirmed everything. Ethan listened quietly, his eyes fixed on me, his pen moving only to jot notes. When I finished, the silence stretched for a moment before he nodded. I've seen families like this before. Greed doesn't just rot the heart, it rots the bond. What you need is undeniable proof, the kind that can't be twisted or explained away. I already have their words, I said, sliding my phone across the desk to show him the photos. He studied them, then shook his head. Good start, but not enough. They'll claim forgery or say you misread. We need them on record, talking freely, unguarded, conversations in their own voices. If they're careless, they'll brag. If they're desperate, they'll plot, and we'll catch every word. A flicker of hope sparked in me. Can you do that? Ethan leaned back, folding his arms. I can. I'll place recording devices in strategic spots. Their study, maybe the dining room where they talk over drinks. Those are the places where people let their guard down. If they've already spoken to shady lawyers or discussed medication, it'll come out. All you have to do is keep playing your part. Let them believe you're weak. The words stung, but I nodded. I've been playing that part for years. They won't suspect a thing. Ethan gave a small smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. Then let's get started. Over the next week, we moved carefully. While Vanessa thought she was humiliating me with errands and chores, Ethan slipped into their world unnoticed. One afternoon, while Miles was at a meeting and Vanessa was busy with her ladies' club, Ethan entered the estate disguised as a contractor. He placed small devices in corners of the study and the dining room, tucked out of sight where no one would think to look. When he handed me a small receiver later, he said, "You'll be surprised how freely people talk in their own homes." He was right. Within days, the recordings began to pour in. I sat at my kitchen table in Milwaukee, headphones pressed against my ears, listening to my daughter's voice in ways I never imagined I would hear it. Once she's in Silver Horizon, it'll be easier, Vanessa said one evening, her voice casual, almost bored. The doctor will back us up. She'll sign what we put in front of her. Miles' voice followed, low and tense. The credit cards are maxed. I need this to move faster, Vanessa. If she doesn't sign soon, the bank will come for the house. You know what that means. I know, Vanessa snapped. Vanessa. Do you think I don't feel the pressure? I can't lose this lifestyle. I won't. Another night, I heard Miles talking to someone over the phone. Yeah, the lawyer said once she's declared unfit, guardianship gives us full control. We can liquidate within 6 months. Just need the paperwork ready. Don't worry, she's old. She won't fight back. My chest tightened as I listened. To them, I wasn't a mother. I wasn't even a person. I was an obstacle, an account to be emptied, a house to be sold. Then came the moment that sealed it. Samantha had joined them for dinner, her laughter echoing in the background as glasses clinked. "How's your mother, Vanessa?" she asked. Vanessa's reply was laced with venom. "She'll be drooling in a year, medicated and harmless. Then we can remodel the whole place. I already have plans for the garage." I pulled the headphones off, my hands trembling, tears stinging my eyes. For a long moment I just sat there, staring at the silent walls of my little kitchen. They were planning not just to take my house or my money, they were planning to erase me. When I handed the recordings to Martin, his expression was grim but steady. "This is enough," he said. "No court, no lawyer, no friend of theirs can argue against their own voices. Keep this safe. When the time comes, this will be the blade you bring down." I placed the files into the red folder that now lived on my desk. Its glossy cover seemed to pulse under the lamplight, holding the weight of every cruel word, every betrayal, every plan they thought I would never uncover. For the first time, I no longer felt helpless. I felt armed. That night, as I sat by the window watching the city lights flicker in the distance, I thought of Vanessa's laughter at the brunch table, the sound of bread hitting the trash, Miles's smug lectures, Richard and Helen's feigned sympathy. By the time Ethan delivered the last batch of recordings, I knew the portrait of my daughter's world better than she knew herself. But there was still one corner of their empire left to examine, one final string that held everything together: their finances. For years, I had funneled money through the Ravenhill Trust, quietly propping up their lifestyle, their mansion, their businesses. If I pulled that string, the entire facade would collapse. It was time to see just how fragile their kingdom really was. Ethan sat with me at my kitchen table one evening, a pile of files spread between us. His handwriting filled the margins of bank statements and credit reports he had gathered with the precision of someone who knew exactly where to look. He tapped a page with his pen. "This is your son-in-law's Achilles heel. Miles has over $250,000 in credit card debt, most of it from gambling, casinos, online betting. He's been making minimum payments, but the interest alone is drowning him." I traced the numbers with my finger. Debt piled on debt, a mountain disguised by a charming smile and expensive suits. Ethan flipped to another document. "Vanessa isn't much better. $120,000 in personal loans, all marked for luxury goods, jewelry, handbags, clothes. She's been using your allowance to cover the minimums. Without it, the whole system collapses." I leaned back, closing my eyes. My daughter, parading as a self-made woman, draped in silk and diamonds, was nothing more than a puppet, dancing on the strings I held. Every glass of champagne, every designer dress, every gala entrance had been paid for by me, and she had called me pathetic. Ethan continued, his voice steady. "The Lakeview estate mortgage is 3 months behind. If another payment is missed, the bank will issue foreclosure notices. The cars, Tesla, Porsche, Lexus, are all registered under Ravenhill. You could repossess them at any time." I opened my eyes and looked at him. "So everything they claim as theirs is already mine?" He nodded. "Exactly. And Sterling Development? The board assumes your daughter holds the reins, but you own 75% of the shares. If you withdraw funding, the projects stall within weeks. Contractors don't get paid, loans default, the company collapses." I pulled the red folder closer, sliding Ethan's documents inside. "Then that's what I'll do. Quietly. I'll let them believe they still hold the power until the moment I take it away." For the next few days, I lived a double life. To Vanessa, I was still the frail mother, smiling weakly, letting her dictate my place in her world. When she invited me to brunch, I went. When she handed me chores, I completed them without protest. To her, my silence was proof of submission. She never saw that every smile concealed calculation, every nod masked resolve. At night, I became the woman she never knew. I reviewed bank records, checked balances, traced transfers from Ravenhill to Sterling, from Sterling to Miles's private accounts. The numbers told a story Vanessa could never control. Without me, she was nothing. One evening, as I pored over the documents, my phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. "Meet me tomorrow. I have something you'll want to see." The next afternoon, I drove to his office. He slid a small recorder across the desk and pressed play. Miles's voice filled the room, low and desperate. "We need that money, Vanessa. If she doesn't sign soon, we'll lose the house. I can't cover the loans anymore." Vanessa's voice followed, sharp with irritation. "She'll sign. She always caves. And if she doesn't, Dr. Kessler will handle it. Once we have the evaluation, it won't matter what she wants. Guardianship gives us control." Ethan clicked the recorder off. The silence afterward felt heavier than the words. "That's enough to sink them," he said. I nodded slowly. "Yes, but I don't want to just sink them. I want them to feel what I felt, helpless, mocked, dismissed. They need to learn that the woman they called pathetic was the only reason they ever stood so tall." That night, I sat in my living room, the glow of a single lamp illuminating the papers spread before me. Mortgage notices, credit statements, ownership certificates. They were not just numbers. They were weapons, each one sharpened by years of neglect and cruelty. I slipped them into the red folder, the lacquered cover gleaming under the light. I thought of Vanessa's words at the ladies' club gathering. "Maybe you'll feel useful if you clean." She had laughed, her friends had smirked, and I had swallowed my pride. Now for the first time, I allowed myself to laugh, quietly, bitterly, but with a strength I hadn't felt in years. They believed I was too old, too weak, too desperate for love. What they didn't understand was that age doesn't dull the mind, it sharpens it. Love, when betrayed, doesn't disappear. It transforms into something stronger, something unbreakable. By the end of that week, I had made my decision. The allowance would end, the mortgage would go unpaid, the cars would be reclaimed, Sterling Development would be cut off at the source, and when the day came, I would not whisper my truth in a dark kitchen. I would speak it aloud, in the brightest room, at the most public moment, with everyone watching. Mother's Day arrived like a storm I had been watching gather for months. Every step I had taken, every document filed, every recording stored, had led to this moment. The morning began quietly in my Milwaukee kitchen. I brewed coffee, but my hands didn't tremble the way they used to. The mug was steady between my fingers. On the table beside me lay the lacquered red folder, thick with the weight of truth. Its glossy surface reflected the light slanting through the blinds. I had polished my armor, and today I would wear it in plain sight. I opened my closet and chose carefully. No frayed cardigans or faded skirts today. I slid into a midnight blue dress, tailored but modest, its fabric flowing smoothly against my frame. Around my neck I clasped a string of pearls, the ones my husband had given me long ago, hidden away for years while I let Vanessa believe I owned nothing worth keeping. My hair I brushed until it gleamed silver under the light. In the mirror I saw not the pitiful woman my daughter mocked, but a woman carved from resilience and fire. As I applied a touch of lipstick, I thought of Vanessa's voice. "Look at you, pathetic." Today, I would let her look again, and this time she would see what she had unleashed. By noon, I was on the road to Chicago. The Buick, as always, rattled and coughed, but I drove it with pride. It had been my disguise for too long. Today, it would be my carriage to the battlefield. The red folder rested on the passenger seat, seatbelt strapped across it like a trusted companion. Every mile closer to the city, my heart beat steadier. The restaurant Vanessa had chosen was the kind of place where chandeliers glistened like ice, and every chair was upholstered in velvet. I pulled into the valet line, watching sleek cars glide ahead of me. My Buick, with its dull paint and tired engine, drew stares. I stepped out calmly, handed the keys to the valet, and picked up the folder, let them stare. By the time this lunch was over, no one would remember the car. They would remember me. Inside, the maitre d' guided me toward the private dining room. The air smelled of roses and roasted meats, expensive perfumes mingling with the clink of fine glassware. Laughter spilled out as he opened the door, and I stepped into the circle of faces that had grown so used to mocking mine. Vanessa was at the center, radiant in a scarlet dress that clung to her like ambition itself. Miles sat beside her, looking polished but pale, his smile strained. Richard and Helen were already sipping champagne, their expressions smug with self-importance. Around them clustered Samantha, Chloe, and a handful of other women from the ladies' club, their jewels catching the light. At the far end of the table sat Dr. Kessler, his leather bag at his side, observing me with professional detachment. "Mother," Vanessa said brightly, rising to kiss my cheek. Her lipstick left a faint mark, but her eyes were cold. "You made it. Doesn't she look lovely, everyone?" I offered a small smile and took my seat at the far end of the table. The red folder I placed carefully in front of me, its lacquered cover gleaming under the chandeliers. Conversations paused for a heartbeat as eyes darted toward it. Then Vanessa clapped her hands lightly. "Let's begin, shall we? After all, this is about celebrating family." Plates of food appeared. Lamb, asparagus, delicate salads. Glasses were filled. Toasts were made. Vanessa leaned in close to her friends, laughing too loudly, performing the role of the dutiful daughter hosting her poor mother for a grand occasion. At one point, Samantha glanced at me and whispered to Chloe, "She looks nervous." Chloe giggled, covering her mouth with a jeweled hand. But I wasn't nervous. I was measuring them. Every gesture, every glance, every word was another piece of evidence in the case they didn't know they were building against themselves. Halfway through the meal, Vanessa stood, glass in hand. "Before dessert," she announced, her voice carrying through the room, "I have a little surprise. My husband and I have made a decision about Mother's future. We want everyone here to know how much we care for her well-being." All eyes turned to me. She smiled, rehearsed and polished. "Mother will be moving to Silver Horizon Residences. It's a beautiful community, safe and full of friends her age. We've already spoken with Dr. Kessler, who assures us it's the right decision." Applause scattered around the table, polite but tinged with curiosity. Dr. Kessler nodded gravely, as though confirming her words with professional weight. Miles clinked his glass against Vanessa's, his relief barely hidden. I remained silent, my hands folded lightly over the folder. Vanessa's smile grew wider, her voice sweet as honey, but sharpened with steel. "Of course, the Milwaukee house will be sold. That money will guarantee her care, and we'll manage everything. It's the least we can do, after all she's done for us." Helen dabbed her lips with a napkin and added, "It's really for the best, Iris. You'll be happier there, and it gives Vanessa and Miles more room to continue building their legacy here." I let their words hang in the air, the room humming with approval. Then I reached out and traced the smooth edge of the red folder with my fingers. The simple motion drew silence like a magnet. Miles's smile faltered. Vanessa's voice caught mid-laugh. Even Dr. Kessler's eyes narrowed in curiosity. I did not speak yet. Not here, not now. The timing had to be perfect. For now, I let them believe they were winning. Let them bask in the glow of their own arrogance. I sipped my wine, steady and calm, while inside my chest the fire grew hotter. They thought the surprise was theirs. Soon, they would learn the surprise was mine. The dining room pulsed with false warmth, every laugh rehearsed, every smile a mask. The chandeliers glowed above us, their light glinting off crystal glasses and polished silver. I sat at the far end of the table, the lacquered red folder resting before me like a silent companion. It caught the eye of anyone who glanced in my direction, though no one dared ask what was inside. Vanessa was the star of the performance, as she always demanded to be. She moved around the table, pouring wine, leaning close to whisper to her friends, her scarlet dress catching the light. She kissed Richard on the cheek, hugged Helen's shoulders, posed for photos with Samantha and Chloe. To anyone watching, she was the picture of a devoted daughter hosting a perfect Mother's Day. But I could see the cracks in her mask, the way her eyes flicked toward me and the folder, a flicker of nerves she tried to bury under her smile. Miles sat stiffly, drinking faster than usual. His laughter came too quickly, too loud, each one followed by a glance at Vanessa as though searching for approval. His hand tightened around his glass until the stem threatened to snap. I watched quietly, my fork resting on the edge of my plate. To the others, I looked passive, a frail woman grateful for attention. Inside, I was memorizing every detail. When Samantha leaned across the table and said, "Vanessa, you're incredible, arranging all this for your mother," I noted the pride that bloomed on my daughter's face. When Chloe added, "Most women would just send flowers, but you've really gone above and beyond," I saw Vanessa's eyes flick toward me, daring me to contradict the lie. I didn't. Not yet. Dr. Kessler was the only one who didn't join the laughter. He sat near the corner, his leather bag on the floor beside him, watching me with careful eyes. He didn't speak much, only nodded when Vanessa mentioned Silver Horizon. His presence was enough, his silence a weapon. He was there to validate whatever story Vanessa wanted told, that I was unstable, incompetent, incapable of managing my own life. Vanessa finally raised her glass. "To Mother," she said, her voice bright, "for all she's given us, for the sacrifices she's made. This next chapter will be her reward, a chance to rest and enjoy life without worries." The table joined in a chorus of "To Mother," glasses clinking together, champagne sparkling. I lifted my own glass slowly, let it touch my lips, but did not drink. I looked around at their faces, my daughter, her husband, her friends, her in-laws, and saw not family, but predators dressed in silk and smiles. The waiters cleared plates and brought out dessert, delicate cakes decorated with sugared flowers, tiny bowls of fruit, coffee in porcelain cups. Vanessa leaned toward me, her voice loud enough for the room. "Mother, isn't this wonderful? Everyone gathered here for you, and soon you'll be in a place where you'll be cared for every day. Doesn't that sound perfect?" I felt every gaze shift toward me, waiting for my agreement. The air tightened, heavy with expectation. I let the silence stretch, then smiled faintly. "It does sound final." Vanessa blinked, unsure of my tone. Miles cleared his throat. "It's not final, Mother. It's secure. You'll be safe. No more struggling with bills. No more worrying about that old house falling apart. We'll handle everything for you." Helen nodded vigorously. "Yes, dear, it's the right choice. And think how relieved you'll feel, knowing your children have it all under control." I placed my hands on the red folder, tracing its glossy edge with my fingertips. Their words droned on, the chorus of reassurance growing louder, more insistent. But under their confidence, I heard desperation. They needed me to agree, to sign, to hand them the keys to the empire they didn't even realize I owned outright. Vanessa reached across the table, her hand brushing mine. "Mother," she said softly, her voice dripping with false tenderness, "we've already spoken with the realtor. Your Milwaukee house can go on the market within weeks. That money, combined with what we've already set aside, guarantees your comfort for years." I looked at her, meeting her eyes directly. For the first time all evening, I let her see something different. Steel, not submission. Her smile faltered. Miles leaned forward, his voice lower, urgent. "This is the best for everyone, Iris. Don't make it harder than it needs to be." I said nothing. Instead, I lifted my glass and took a slow sip, letting the silence grow heavy again. Around the table, the laughter dimmed. Samantha shifted uncomfortably. Chloe whispered to Helen. Richard tapped his fingers against the tablecloth. Dr. Kessler cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. Vanessa forced another smile, trying to regain control. "Well, enough of that serious talk. Tonight is about celebrating. Let's enjoy dessert, shall we?" She clapped her hands lightly, and the waiters moved again, setting plates before us. But the tension remained. It hung over the table like a storm cloud, ready to burst. I sat back in my chair, the red folder resting beneath my hands, my pearls cool against my skin. The time was almost here. Soon the masks would fall, the laughter would die, and the truth would shatter the illusion they had built. They thought tonight was their stage. They thought I was the supporting act in their performance. What they didn't realize was that I was the author of this story, and the climax was mine to write. The moment came not with a shout, but with a silence so deep it pressed against the skin. Dessert plates sat untouched, coffee cooled in porcelain cups, and every voice around the table seemed to fade as I slid the lacquered red folder to the center. Its glossy cover caught the chandelier light, and for an instant, the room seemed to hold its breath. I folded my hands on the table, lifted my chin, and spoke in a voice sharper than the silver cutlery glinting before us. "Before we continue celebrating, there are truths you need to hear, and tonight you will hear them." Vanessa let out a nervous laugh. "Mother, this isn't the time." I cut her off, my voice calm but implacable. "It's the only time. Because tonight you raised your glass to me, pretending gratitude, while planning my burial in a place you call comfort. Silver horizon, you said? A golden prison, dressed up to look like a paradise. You thought I wouldn't see through it. You thought I'd be too weak, too desperate for your love, to question why you wanted me out of my house, away from my life." Miles shifted in his seat, his knuckles whitening around his glass. Richard and Helen froze mid-sip, eyes darting to Vanessa. Samantha and Chloe leaned in, whispers caught in their throats. I opened the folder slowly, deliberately. The sound of the clasp clicking open echoed like a gunshot. From within, I drew out the first stack of papers. Allowance, $12,000 a month. For years, I gave it to you, quietly, letting you live as though you earned it yourselves. You told me I should be grateful for the $600 you handed back to me like charity. Tonight, the allowance ends, every cent of it, gone. Miles's mouth fell open. What are you talking about? You can't just... I placed another document on the table, sliding it toward him. Lakeview Estate. You've boasted to everyone here that this house belongs to you, that you and Vanessa built it from nothing. But the deed is in my name. Always has been. You don't own the walls around you, the roof above your head, or the garage you've already promised to others. As of tonight, you live here only because I allow it. Gasps rippled through the room. Helen's face blanched. Richard set his glass down too hard, spilling champagne onto the tablecloth. And the cars, I continued, pulling out contracts and titles. Tesla, Porsche, Lexus, each one registered under Ravenhill Trust. My trust. Tomorrow morning they will be repossessed. Drive them tonight, because it will be the last time. Vanessa's voice cracked, her hands trembling as she reached for the papers. This is ridiculous. You can't do this in front of your friends? I leaned forward, my eyes locking with hers. You paraded me in front of them as an example of failure, a reminder of how far above me you'd climbed. Tonight, they see who you really are. Every glass of champagne, every designer dress, every gala invitation, paid for by the woman you called pathetic. The room was silent now. No whispers, no laughter, only the sound of breathing, heavy and uneven. Samantha's face had drained of amusement. Chloe looked away, embarrassed to have joined in the cruelty. Even Dr. Kessler shifted uncomfortably, his pen frozen above his notebook. I let the silence grow heavy before continuing. Sterling Development, the company you flaunt as your own triumph. The board may see you as the face, but I am the spine. 75% of the shares rest in my hands. Without me, your empire is dust. As of this evening, funding is withdrawn. Consider your projects stalled, your contracts void, your reputation finished. Vanessa's lips parted, but no words came. Her eyes darted to Miles, who sat pale and rigid. His shoulders slumped, as though the weight of the truth had crushed him. I gathered the papers into a neat pile, placed them back into the red folder, and closed it with a snap. Then I rose slowly, letting my chair scrape against the marble floor. My pearls glinted under the chandelier. My dress shimmered dark as midnight, and for the first time in years, I felt taller than everyone in the room. Tell your husband why the allowance ends. Tell his parents why they will lose this estate. Tell yourself why the company you parade as yours is already over. Tell them all, Vanessa, because I won't be saying it again. The room erupted into silence so loud it felt like thunder. Miles pushed back his chair, his face contorted, but Richard's hand shot out to stop him. Helen's lips trembled, her eyes darting around the room as though searching for an exit. Samantha shifted uncomfortably. Chloe fiddled with her bracelet, their laughter long forgotten. And Vanessa, my daughter, sat frozen. Her face was pale, her lipstick smeared at the edges, her hands clenched into fists on the table. For once, her eyes could not hold mine. She looked down, broken, the mask of arrogance shattered. I placed a final hand on the red folder and whispered, steady and cold, "You called me pathetic. Look again." The room felt like a stage after the curtain had fallen, the audience stunned into silence. Faces that once smirked and sneered were pale masks of disbelief. But I was not finished. The red folder still held the sharpest blades, and now I would use them. I lifted another stack of documents and spread them across the linen tablecloth. The paper slid smoothly, each page a nail in the coffin of their illusions. Sterling Development, I said evenly. The company you claim as your crown. These certificates confirm 75% of the shares belong to me. Every contract you bragged about, every gala you attended, every article praising your vision, it all stood on my investment. Without me, your empire crumbles. Vanessa reached for the papers, her hands shaking. No, that's not true. I raised my voice, steady and sharp. It is true. Signed, notarized, legal. For years, I let you enjoy the illusion. Tonight, it ends. Miles swallowed hard, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He tried to rally, his voice a hoarse whisper. You can't just cut us off. We've built connections, contracts. I pulled out a small recorder from the folder and placed it gently on the table. The device looked harmless, but when I pressed play, the sound that filled the room was venom in their own voices. Vanessa's voice rang out, clear, undeniable. "She'll be drooling in a year, medicated and harmless. Then we can remodel the whole place. I already have plans for the garage." Gasps spread around the table. Chloe's hand flew to her mouth. Samantha leaned back, her eyes wide. Richard's face turned crimson. Helen dropped her napkin. Miles's voice followed on the recording. "The lawyer said once she's declared unfit, guardianship gives us full control. We can liquidate within 6 months. She won't fight back." The words echoed in the stunned silence. I clicked the recorder off and let the weight of it settle. "You plotted to strip me of everything," I said quietly, my eyes sweeping across their faces. "My freedom, my dignity, my life. You weren't just cruel, you were predators." Vanessa's face crumpled. She stammered, "Mother, I didn't mean... Those were just words. I was angry. Angry?" I leaned forward, my voice calm but cutting. "You called me pathetic, laughed at my bread, used me as a prop for your friends. You wanted to bury me alive in a place you dressed up as a gift, and you dared to think I wouldn't see it." Richard pushed his chair back abruptly. "Vanessa, is this true? Did you say those things?" His voice trembled, outrage breaking through his polished facade. Helen whispered, horrified, "You told us the estate would be ours. You promised." Vanessa turned to them, desperate. I only said that because I thought Mother was going to sign..." Her words faltered as I raised my phone and dialed. The line clicked, and Martin Hale's calm voice answered on speaker. "Iris?" "Martin," I said, my gaze locked on Vanessa. "Cancel all transfers, effective immediately. Eviction notices are to be issued for the Lakeview estate. Repossess the cars. Place Sterling Development under new management, in my name." Gasps rippled again. Miles shot to his feet. "You can't do this. This is our life." I turned to him slowly, my voice icy. "Your life was built on my silence. That silence is over." Martin's voice on the phone was steady. "Consider it done. I'll send confirmation tonight." I ended the call and slid the phone back into the folder. The sound of my pearls brushing against the papers was the only noise in the room. Miles collapsed back into his chair, his face ashen. Richard and Helen avoided his eyes, their expressions twisted in betrayal. Samantha looked down, ashamed, while Chloe whispered something to the woman beside her, her face pale. And Vanessa, my daughter, sat frozen, her lipstick smeared, her mascara running, her eyes wide and wet. She opened her mouth, but no words came. For the first time in her life, she was speechless. I rose from my chair, my hand resting on the red folder. My voice filled the room with quiet power. "You wanted to control me. Tonight, I control you. You wanted to bury me. Tonight, I bury your lies. You thought you could erase me. But it's you who will vanish. Your houses, your cars, your company, your reputation. Gone." The chandeliers glittered above us, the room holding its breath as if even the air dared not move. I looked at each of them, one by one. "Tell your husband why the allowance is gone. Tell your in-laws why they'll lose this house. Tell your friends why your company is finished. And then tell yourself why you thought you could ever defeat me." The storm passed, but its aftermath clung to the air like smoke after a fire. The private dining room that had once buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses now sat in stunned quiet. Forks rested where they had been dropped, champagne warmed untouched in crystal flutes. Every pair of eyes avoided mine. The performance was over, and the actors had been stripped of their costumes. Vanessa slumped in her chair, her mascara smudged into shadows beneath her eyes. Miles sat rigid, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping the edge of the table as though it might save him from drowning. Richard and Helen looked at their daughter-in-law with something close to disgust, their carefully practiced smiles gone. Samantha and Chloe, once gleeful accomplices in humiliation, now shifted uncomfortably, wishing they could dissolve into the walls. I gathered the papers back into the lacquered red folder and stood. My pearls glimmered under the chandelier as I looked down the length of the table. "I will not raise my voice again," I said evenly. "You've heard everything you needed to hear. What you do with it is your burden. What I do with it is mine." No one spoke. Even Vanessa, always quick with a retort, sat silent. I turned and walked from the room, the click of my heels against marble echoing louder than applause. The maitre d' bowed slightly as I passed. The waiters stepped aside. The restaurant outside hummed with life. Laughter, music, the clatter of dishes, but none of it touched me. I was walking away from a stage I had finally reclaimed. Outside, the night air was cool against my face. The valet hurried to bring me my Buick, its tired engine rattling as if embarrassed to sit among sleek imported cars. I placed the red folder on the passenger seat and slid behind the wheel. For once, I didn't feel shame about the car's groans. It had carried me through years of disguise, and tonight it carried me into freedom. The following weeks unfolded like dominoes. Martin sent confirmation of every action taken that night. The Lakeview estate, once paraded as Vanessa's crown jewel, was seized under my authority. Eviction papers arrived and the family had no defense. The cars, symbols of their manufactured prestige, were repossessed one by one, leaving the driveway bare. Sterling Development, cut off from my funding, staggered into chaos. Contracts dissolved, creditors circled, and the board turned to me, the true majority shareholder, for leadership. News spread quickly among their circle. Samantha stopped calling Vanessa, unwilling to be associated with scandal. Chloe canceled luncheons. Invitations to parties and galas evaporated overnight. The same friends who once sneered at me now whispered behind Vanessa's back. Reputation, so fragile, collapsed faster than fortune. As for Miles, his debts surfaced in the open. Without my hidden support, the banks came knocking. Lawsuits followed. Creditors demanded payment he could no longer stall. Richard and Helen, once eager to benefit from their daughter-in-law's schemes, quietly distanced themselves. At gatherings, I heard they avoided mentioning Vanessa's name, embarrassed by the association. I, meanwhile, stepped into a different life. I moved into a penthouse overlooking downtown Chicago, a space filled with light and open air. Each morning, I stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the city move beneath me. For the first time in years, I felt not like an outsider, but like a woman fully present in her own life. I joined a yoga class where no one knew me as Vanessa's mother. I began painting again, filling canvases with colors I had once been too tired to see. And quietly, I launched the Aurora Foundation, an organization dedicated to women who had been stripped of dignity by their own families, women told they were burdens, until someone took their lives apart. The first letters of support I received, the first stories shared with me, filled me with a sense of purpose far greater than any company stock. One afternoon, I walked into the foundation's office, a bright space filled with books, flowers, and the steady hum of women working. A young volunteer handed me a folder of applications for aid. "They trust you," she said softly, "because you know what it feels like." I held the folder against my chest and nodded. "Yes," I whispered, "I do." Back in Milwaukee, the little house where I had once hidden my strength stood empty, soon to be sold. I visited it one last time, walking through the narrow hallway, touching the peeling wallpaper, the kitchen table where I had first spread out the evidence of betrayal. It no longer felt like a place of exile. It felt like the cocoon I had finally broken free from. Vanessa and Miles, I heard, moved into a smaller apartment after losing Lakeview. Their friends no longer visited. Miles struggled with his creditors. Vanessa tried to maintain appearances, but failed. Each whisper of their downfall reached me not with triumph, but with a deep, steady satisfaction. Justice had been done, not with fists or fury, but with patience, precision, and truth. On a warm evening in June, I hosted a small gathering at my penthouse for the women of the Aurora Foundation. We shared stories, laughed over glasses of wine, and painted together on the rooftop terrace. As the sun dipped below the skyline, I felt something I hadn't in years: peace. I looked around the terrace, at women smiling, women who had once wept, women who now found their strength again, and I realized that my story was not just about revenge or survival, it was about transformation. Vanessa thought she had defined me with her cruelty, but I had written my own ending, and it was brighter, stronger, more enduring than she could ever imagine. 4 months had passed since the night I laid the red folder on the table and silenced my daughter with her own greed. Life had settled into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar. I woke each morning in my Chicago penthouse, sunlight pouring across wide windows, coffee warming my hands as I looked out at the city skyline. The days no longer carried the weight of dread. They stretched ahead like open roads. I spent my time building the Aurora Foundation. Each week brought new letters, new stories from women who had been cast aside by their families, women stripped of their dignity by children they had once raised with love. Some wrote about lost homes, others about stolen savings. All of them carried the same ache I had known, the ache of betrayal from those closest to you. When I met them, I listened not as a benefactor, but as a sister in survival. Their trust filled me more than any mansion or stock certificate ever could. And yet, no matter how full my days were, a shadow remained: Vanessa, my daughter. The silence between us stretched like a canyon, but I knew it would not last forever. The call came on a quiet afternoon. My phone buzzed, and when I glanced at the screen, her name appeared. For a long moment, I simply stared at it, the letters sharp against the glass. I almost let it ring out. But something in me, curiosity, maybe compassion, made me answer. Her voice was not the one I remembered from Mother's Day. It was thin, brittle, stripped of the arrogance that once dripped from every word. "Mother," she whispered, "please, can we meet?" I said nothing for a moment, then answered simply, "Where?" We chose a cafe tucked away on a quiet street, far from the circles she once ruled. When I arrived, Vanessa was already there, seated at a small corner table. She wore no designer dress, no glittering jewelry. Her hair was tied back, her makeup smudged as though applied in haste. For the first time in years, she looked like a woman rather than a performance. She rose when she saw me, then faltered, unsure whether to embrace me. I took my seat, and she sat down slowly, folding her hands in her lap. For a long while, we said nothing. The hum of conversation around us, the hiss of the espresso machine, the clink of cups, all filled the silence we couldn't. Finally, she spoke. Her voice shook. "If you had been poor, I'd still have done it." The honesty struck like a slap, sharper than any denial could have been. She did not cloak her words in excuses. She admitted what I had always feared. It wasn't about money alone. It was about power, about control, about the person she had chosen to become. I set my cup down and looked at her, really looked. The daughter I had once cradled, once defended, once loved without condition, sat across from me, hollowed by her own choices. "The money was never the problem, Vanessa," I said quietly. "Who you became was." Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not reach for me. Perhaps she knew it was too late. Perhaps she finally understood that some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. We sat in silence again, the gulf between us wider than ever. Then I stood, adjusting the pearls at my neck, my strength no longer hidden. "I hope one day you find a way back to yourself," I told her, "but I won't walk that road with you." I turned and left her there, the bell above the cafe door jingling softly as I stepped into the sunlight. The air smelled of fresh bread from the bakery next door, warm and alive. I walked slowly down the street, the city moving around me, every step steady, every breath free. Later that evening, I wrote in my journal, the one place where I allowed myself full honesty. At 65, I reclaimed my power. I learned that silence is not peace, that patience is not love when it becomes submission. I learned that even in betrayal, there can be clarity. And I learned that I am not too old, not too late, to begin again. I closed the journal and placed it on my desk beside the red folder. The folder was no longer a weapon. It was a relic, a reminder of the night I chose myself over their cruelty. I no longer needed it. The truth had already done its work. That night, I stood on my balcony, the city lights shimmering like stars scattered across the earth. Somewhere out there, Vanessa was facing the ruins of her choices. And somewhere out there, other women were still fighting their own battles, still waiting to reclaim their voices. I whispered into the night, "And so can you." It was not just a statement, it was a promise. To myself, to the women who wrote to me, to anyone who had ever been told they were nothing. My story was mine alone, but its message belonged to anyone brave enough to hear it. The wind caught the hem of my dress. The pearls at my throat glistened under the city glow, and for the first time in my life, I felt not like a mother discarded, but like a woman reborn. The story had begun with humiliation, but it ended with freedom. And freedom, once claimed, is never surrendered again.